presents somewhat of a trivial matter. Despite being central to the core mechanics of many games, killing has lacked a certain significance, whether it be in terms of narrative or in terms of gameplay, often being implemented as an action that requires little more than a single button press. Culturally, killing is perceived differently all around the world, and it ranges from being a highly illegal or violent act, or an act of bravery and honor. The universal element, though, is that killing is never taken lightly anywhere. How many enemies or innocents have you killed altogether in every game you've ever played? For the average player, it's probably in the tens of thousands. Choose a specific game now. The Last of Us has a helpful death counter, which tells me I killed 1,207 men and infected humans over the course of 2 games. That's pretty insane. Compare that to Luis Garavito, the man commonly given the title of the world's most prolific serial killer. He's been confirmed to have killed 138 people. And I surpassed that. That's something worth contemplating. First off, though, it's not a fair comparison by any means. Most of my victims were murderers or infectious corpses, not a normal living human being. I feel that I can properly distinguish reality from a virtual world. If presented with the proper motivation and means, I'm not sure if I could kill someone. I'm just not sure. I hold a certain value to human life, as well as for animals and to an extent plants. If you saw someone shot down only a few meters from you in a store, you'd probably be affected for life. The average player of an M-rated game is probably not a killer in the real world. The Last of Us is a story about a man who's been hardened by 20 years of death and tragedy. A man who developed the ability to kill without a moment's hesitation. But I'm from the suburbs. I don't think I've ever touched a functioning gun. Why isn't there a game about a child who has to kill for the first time, even though they don't want to? I haven't seen that in a game before. There's lots of mechanical and narrative potential in games for dealing with killing, and it's something I'd like more developers to take advantage of. Before I move on, let me establish that I'm anti-censorship in games. I'm all for a game that wants to have fodder enemies by the thousands, so long as the killing helps the tone of the game. The Last of Us is a very bleak game. Lots of killing suits it. In a game that is trying to recreate a real-life war or even create one of its own, killing should be frequent and graphic to realistically present just how terrifying and harrowing the life of a soldier is. That respects the situation that is being replicated, and it also makes for a satisfying play experience. In a platformer or, say, a space shooter, the enemies are often fictional creatures or vehicles, which causes a sort of disconnect from the real world. Squashing a Goomba or blowing up a ship in Galaga are both one-button actions, jump or shoot, very little effort required. Those enemies are going to die by the hundreds, but you're killing a sentient fungus. That's comical and lighthearted, just like the rest of the game. What I would find really cool is a game that makes it a large task to kill anything, and I mean anything in the game. In Red Dead Redemption, it's no big task to shoot down a bird. What if there was a game where killing a bird meant tracking it for miles, waiting for it to settle on the ground and sneaking up behind it to kill it with your bare hands? If that were the case, you'd put a bit more thought into deciding whether or not to kill some random animal. Building on that idea, I've killed my fair share of innocent people in Red Dead Redemption. Well, what if I was required to attend the funeral for each person I killed? That would just detract from the kind of game Red Dead Redemption is trying to be. I enjoy playing games where I get to be a gunslinging badass, but I also want to play a game where the consequences of my actions have a larger emotional impact. Now, although death has become more graphic in more recent games, murdering has been with the medium pretty much since its inception. The 80s were full of space and war games, and so is today's market, just with better technology behind it all. The cool thing about a game like Pac-Man, where eating is the central mechanic, is that it still made killing significant. Turning the tables on a ghost at the last second is always satisfying and rewarding. That's an achievement. Popping enemies in Dig Dug doesn't usually feel like an achievement. In fact, it's necessary to succeed. What kill feels more special to you? With that in mind, killing can still be central to a game's mechanics. It just has to be less frequent. Let's take Shadow of the Colossus for instance. Each individual Colossus in that game takes observation, planning, and several minutes to kill. You look upon your fallen enemy as a true rival, one who took courage and wits to best in battle. But were the Colossi really your rivals, or were they just innocents who stood in the way of your quest? Did you feel bad about killing at least one of them? That would make for a pretty cool game, a game that has the player questioning each kill they make. And Shadow of the Colossus had only 16 main enemies to kill. Besides the salamanders, there were no arbitrary hordes of fodder enemies to kill, making the impact of each Colossi's death all the more significant. The splendid visual novel game, 9 Persons, 9 Hours, 9 Doors, as well as its sequel, Virtue's Last Reward, have main casts of 9 characters. The premise is a bit too complex to explain here, stuff involving bombs, intestines, and rabbits, but each game puts those characters in a game where death is a likely outcome. There are lots of endings and branching paths in both games, and, well, characters die horrible, horrible deaths. It's really sad sometimes. But each character is wonderfully developed and complex, so each death hits the player quite hard, especially when their death was the result of one of the player's choices. There's a strong narrative focus in those games, and they help exemplify just how important death can be for a story. Games have the potential to force difficult moral decisions, like whether or not to spare someone's life. Now, characters generally kill for one of 3 reasons: survival, principle, or vengeance. Now, these are all perfectly valid and interesting motivations to kill, but sometimes the struggle to resist the urge to kill can make for a more interesting story. Ride to Hell Retribution received an overwhelmingly negative response to many of its elements, one being its story. What starts out as a simple mission to avenge your brother's murder turns into a rampage where the player rides around killing hordes upon hordes of random bikers. I realize most of your victims are criminals, but seriously? If the game really wanted to make an emotionally moving story about revenge, make the game about tracking down 4 or 5 specific gang members, not destroying an army of faceless thugs. Now, although beating people to near comatose states is sort of borderline, I felt that Batman Arkham Origins told a much more engaging story that centered around the idea of fighting the urge to kill. Out of the 3 Arkham games up to that point, Origins puts the most focus on Bruce's strong resolve to fight justice without killing anyone, even the most unredeemable of criminals. Bruce's conviction made for an interesting final fight where he had to find a way to win without killing his opponent. The gameplay wasn't affected, and there was only one way to win, but the fact that this moral conflict was brought up in a game shows some serious narrative potential for future games. To conclude this video, I want to talk about a Flash game. It's called Corporate Assassin, and even though it's rough around the edges, I think it's a pretty good example of a game where death is given a proper weight. I recommend giving it a try, so I'll link to it in the description. To summarize quickly, you play as either the boss or the assassin, at a table of 8 different people. When in one role, you want to kill the other person, except you don't know who is who. The assassin's job is to gain trust, lie, and kill someone each round, but the boss is actually presented with an interesting moral dilemma. The boss has the most influence at the table, and at the end of each round, a vote is taken to execute the most untrusted person present. Now, if you're like me, you identify with even the most pixelated of characters, and you feel guilty when you turned everyone against someone who's just a normal employee. As you slowly diminish in numbers, you realize you have to betray people who put their trust into you. Is killing all of your employees worth it just to find the assassin? That's the situation Corporate Assassin creates, and with only the simplest of dialogue boxes and sprites. And if a game as simple as that treats murder with any amount of weight, imagine the experiences that can be created by professional development teams. If we want to be taken seriously as a medium for storytelling and interaction, let's tone down the killing. Once in a while. Again, thanks for watching, and feel free to leave some feedback in the comments. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and have a great day.